They say marriage is about building a life together. My husband, Mark, and I built an empire of seamless technology and quiet perfection. But my heart, that quiet traitor, has started to beat for a man who lives in a messy attic with nothing but canvases and the smell of turpentine on his hands. Betrayal doesn't start in a bed. It begins with the dangerous, intoxicating thought of being truly seen. The rain started again just as Mark's self-driving car hummed into the driveway. It was a Tuesday in October, 2025, and the sky was the color of a bruise. I watched from the kitchen window, my hands paused over the sink full of soapy water. The motion-activated porch light flickered on, casting a sterile white halo around him as he stepped out. His suit was a sharp, dark gray, impervious to the drizzle, his posture radiating the easy confidence of a man who commanded algorithms that shaped the world. "Hey," he said, stepping inside. He didn't kiss me. He hadn't for a long time. He placed his briefcase on the polished floor and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Smells good. Is that the rosemary chicken?" "It is," I confirmed, my voice a neutral, pleasant tone I perfected over 12 years of marriage. "Josh has soccer practice until 7, and Maya's finishing up her coding homework." "Good, good." He glanced at the smart screen on the refrigerator door, which displayed our family's color-coded schedule. "Big presentation tomorrow. I'll be in the office late." He was already loosening his tie, his mind miles away, deep in virtual architectures and data streams. He was a vice president at Omnicore, a tech giant that practically owned Seattle's skyline. He was brilliant, successful, and the architect of the beautiful, gilded cage I lived in. Our house was a marvel of modern convenience. The lights adjusted to our circadian rhythms, the grocery list populated itself, and the temperature was always a perfect 72 degrees. It was a home designed to eliminate friction, to make life seamless. But in doing so, it had also eliminated me. My purpose was to oversee the automated systems, to provide the human touch on a life that was increasingly run by code. I was the curator of our perfect existence. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed and the house had settled into its program quiet, I found myself in the guest room closet, looking for a spare blanket. Tucked away in a dusty box under a stack of old photo albums was my portfolio. It was thin, black, and worn at the edges. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Inside were charcoal sketches and watercolor studies from a lifetime ago. A portrait of my grandmother, her wrinkles rendered with a love I could still feel in my fingertips. A landscape of the Oregon coast, the sea foam a chaotic dance of white and turquoise. These weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. They were proof that a person named Claire had once existed, a person who saw the world in shades and hues, in light and shadow, not just in appointments and meal plans. I remember the night classes at the community college, the smell of turpentine and damp clay, the thrill of transforming a blank canvas into something real. That's where I had known Leo. He was the opposite of Mark. Wild hair always flecked with paint, clothes perpetually smudged with charcoal, living off ramen and passion. He saw art not as a hobby, but as a language, as vital as breathing. While I was sketching a bowl of fruit, he would be wrestling with vast, abstract canvases, trying to paint the sound of a jazz saxophone or the feeling of a panic attack. Mark had called it my cute little hobby. When we got engaged, he convinced me it was time to be practical. "You won't have time for that stuff when we have kids, honey," he'd said, smiling his charming, persuasive smile. "And besides, my salary can give you a much better life than selling a few paintings ever could." I had believed him. I had packed away my easel, my brushes, my tubes of ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow. I traded them for a KitchenAid mixer and a state-of-the-art vacuum cleaner. I traded the chaos of creation for the sterile order of a suburban home. Closing the portfolio, a familiar ache settled deep in my chest. It was the quiet, suffocating pressure of a life half-lived. Mark didn't see me, not really. He saw a wife, a mother, the efficient CEO of our domestic corporation. He didn't see the woman who once stayed up all night trying to capture the exact shade of a streetlight's glow on a wet sidewalk. I put the portfolio back, burying it under the weight of my current life. The smart screen in the kitchen pinged softly, reminding me that Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Mark's entire family would be coming. His loud, successful brothers and their polished wives. His critical mother who always found a speck of dust on my mantelpiece. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. It was meant to be a celebration of gratitude, but for me, it always felt like a performance review. And this year, I had a terrible feeling that I was about to fail. The day of Thanksgiving arrived under a sky the color of wet concrete. Our house, however, was an island of calculated warmth. The smart thermostat suffused the air with a gentle heat, and a curated playlist of soft jazz mingled with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon from the automated oven. I moved through the space like a director on opening night, adjusting a silver candlestick here, smoothing a linen napkin there. Every detail was perfect. Every surface gleamed. It was a stage set for a happy family, and I was the lead actress, forgetting my own lines. Mark's family descended upon us at precisely 2 p.m. His mother, Eleanor, swept in first, her sharp eyes immediately scanning the room for imperfections. Her kiss was a dry, papery brush against my cheek. "Claire, dear, everything looks adequate." Then came his 2 brothers, Tom and David, with their wives, Jessica and Sarah. They were louder, shinier versions of Mark, men who talked in stock prices and quarterly earnings, and women whose effortless elegance was the result of immense effort. They filled the living room with booming laughter and the clinking of wine glasses, while I smiled and refilled and played my part. The dinner was a success, if success is measured by the absence of overt disaster. The turkey was moist, the smart oven having cooked it to a precise internal temperature. The conversation flowed around me, a river of tech IPOs, luxury electric vehicles, and vacation plans to AI-managed resorts in Bali. I floated on the periphery, offering more wine, clearing plates, my existence reduced to a series of helpful gestures. The moment it all shattered came during dessert. Sarah, David's wife, turned to me with a bright, curious smile. "Claire, with the kids so self-sufficient now in this amazing house that practically runs itself, what do you do to keep busy? Any hobbies?" It was an innocent question, but in the sudden lull of conversation, it felt like a spotlight snapping on. I felt a flush creep up my neck. "Oh, well," I stammered, my mind grasping for something, anything. I've been thinking about maybe painting again." The word hung in the air, fragile and out of place, like a wildflower in a sterile laboratory. Mark let out a short, booming laugh. It wasn't a shared, warm laugh. It was a laugh of dismissal. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing grandly with his fork. "Oh, you have to hear this," he announced to the table. "Claire's going to be the next Picasso." The table chuckled politely. I felt my smile freeze on my face, a brittle mask. "She has this cute little portfolio hidden away from her college days," he continued, warming to his audience. "We pull it out sometimes for a laugh. Lots of emotional-looking bowls of fruit." He winked at his brother. "I keep telling her, honey, stick to managing the house. Your RA on that is much better." The laughter this time was louder. It washed over me, a wave of acid and condescension. In that moment, surrounded by family in my perfect home, I had never felt more alone, more invisible. He hadn't just dismissed a hobby, he had taken the last secret part of me, the part that dreamed in color, and held it up for ridicule. He had belittled it, rendered it worthless, and in doing so, he had rendered me worthless. I stood up, my movements stiff. More coffee, anyone? My voice was shockingly calm, a stranger's voice. I escaped to the kitchen. I leaned against the cold, stainless steel refrigerator, the one that knew when we were out of milk but had no idea its owner was breaking apart. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white, and stared at my reflection in the dark screen of the oven. A pale, hollow-eyed woman stared back. A ghost in her own home. The performance was over. The stage was collapsing. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not spend one more day of my life in this beautiful, empty house. The days after Thanksgiving were a blur of oppressive silence. Mark was either oblivious or indifferent to the chasm that had opened between us. He went back to his world of data streams, leaving me to haunt the quiet, automated rooms of our house. The humiliation from that dinner had crystallized into a hard, cold resolve in my chest. On Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I didn't program the car for the organic market or the kids' tutoring centers. I manually input a destination, Fremont. I drove through the relentless Seattle drizzle, the city lights smearing across the windshield like wet paint. Fremont was the city's quirky, artistic heart, a place I hadn't let myself visit because it reminded me too much of the person I used to be. I parked the car and walked, pulling my coat tight against the damp cold. I passed thrift stores and artisan coffee shops, my feet eventually leading me, as if by instinct, to a small, unassuming storefront with a faded sign, Ballard Art and Frame. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside. The air hit me first, that glorious, forgotten smell of linseed oil, turpentine, and fresh-cut wood frames. It was the smell of possibility. Rows of paint tubes stood like tiny, colorful soldiers. Canvases of all sizes leaned against the walls. It was a temple, and I was a long-lapsed worshiper. "Can I help you find something?" I turned. The voice was familiar, a low, gentle rumble. And then I saw him. His hair was shorter, threaded with a little more gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same, kind, intense, and a startling shade of green. He had a smudge of what looked like phthalo blue on his cheek. "Leo?" I breathed out, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes widened in recognition, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Claire? Claire Jensen? Wow, it's been, what, 15 years?" "Something like that," I said, a real smile, a rusty, unfamiliar feeling, touching my own lips. "You work here?" "Own the place, actually," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "It's not Omnicore, but it pays for the ramen." He looked at me, his gaze direct and genuinely curious, in a way no one had looked at me for years. "What brings you here? Don't tell me you're just framing photos of the kids." The question was so direct, so him. I felt the carefully constructed wall of the Magnolia housewife begin to crumble. "No," I said, the word tasting of freedom. I was thinking of painting again." The smile on his face grew wider, reaching his eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated delight. He didn't laugh. He didn't call it cute. He saw it for what it was. "That's the best thing I've heard all year," he said, his voice soft. "What stopped you?" And so, leaning against a rack of watercolor paper, under the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights, I told him. I told him about the marriage, the perfect house, the kids, the suffocating emptiness. I even told him about Thanksgiving. I didn't mean to, but the words just tumbled out, a confession I didn't know I was holding. He listened without interruption, his green eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, the silence in the small shop was thick with understanding. "A gilded cage is still a cage, Claire," he said quietly. He gestured towards the back of the shop. "I have a studio upstairs. An attic, really. A few of us get together on Tuesday nights. No lessons, no judgment. We just paint. And drink cheap wine. You should come." My heart gave a painful, hopeful lurch. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was everything I needed. "I don't even have brushes anymore," I whispered, the excuse sounding feeble even to my own ears. Leo grinned, grabbing a small basket. "Then let's fix that." As he started picking out brushes, a tube of cadmium yellow, a small canvas, the basic tools of a resurrection, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I'd long mistaken for dead. It was the dangerous, intoxicating feeling of being truly seen. Tuesday nights. The first Tuesday felt like an act of high treason. I told Mark I was joining a book club. A book club was a safe, suburban, wife-like activity. He barely looked up from his screen. "Okay, honey, don't be out too late." My hands shook as I drove to Fremont. Every traffic light felt like an accusation. What was I doing? I was a mother, a wife, a respectable woman. I was not the kind of person who lied to her husband to go sit in an attic with a man who had paint on his cheek. Leo's attic was up a rickety flight of stairs behind the shop. And it was everything my house was not: chaotic, cluttered, and vibrantly, gloriously alive. Canvases in various states of completion were stacked against every wall. Jars bristling with brushes covered every flat surface. The air was thick with the smell of turpentine and old coffee, and a bluesy jazz track was playing from a vintage-looking speaker. The sole source of heat was a small, glowing space heater in the corner. There were 3 other people there. A young barista with purple hair, an elderly man who introduced himself as a retired history professor, and a woman about my age who said she was a therapist. There was no pretense, no judgment. They were all just there for the same reason: to create. Leo handed me a glass of cheap red wine in a jam jar. "Find a spot," he said with a warm smile. "The only rule is there are no rules." I set up my small canvas on a wobbly easel in the corner. For the first hour, I just stared at it. The blankness was terrifying. My hands, so competent at chopping vegetables and scheduling appointments, felt clumsy and foreign holding a brush. I felt the professor's knowing gaze and the therapist's gentle one, but no one said anything. They just worked on their own pieces, lost in their own worlds. Finally, I squeezed a line of ultramarine blue onto my palette, then cadmium yellow. I mixed them, and a startling, vivid green bloomed under my brush. It was the color of Leo's eyes. Without thinking, I touched the brush to the canvas. For the next 2 hours, the world outside that attic ceased to exist. There was no Mark, no perfect house, no PTA meetings. There was only the scrape of the brush, the dance of color, and the slow, thrilling resurrection of a part of myself I thought had died. I wasn't painting anything specific, just shapes and colors, feelings I had no words for. The gray of my living room, the angry red of my humiliation, the brilliant, hopeful green of this new beginning. When I finally looked up, the attic was empty except for Leo, who was quietly cleaning his brushes by the sink. "It's almost midnight," he said, his voice soft. I looked at my hands. They were stained with paint. I looked at the canvas. It was a mess, but it was an honest mess. It was my mess. "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me, he replied, turning to face me, his eyes serious. You're the one who showed up. Driving home, I felt like a different person. The rain was still falling, but for the first time in years, I saw the beauty in it. The way the neon signs of the city bled into the wet asphalt, creating a vast, shimmering watercolor. I crept into my silent house, the smell of paint clinging to me like a secret. Mark was asleep. I slipped into bed, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a wild, exhilarating joy. My secret life had begun. 2 worlds. My weeks began to be measured in the days between Tuesdays. The 6 days at home were a grayscale existence. The silence between Mark and me grew heavier, filled with unspoken resentment. The house, once a source of pride, now felt like a mausoleum. Its perfect, automated hum was the sound of my own suffocation. The book club went late again? Mark asked one night, glancing at the clock as I walked in. It was past midnight. We were discussing a really dense chapter, I lied, my heart thumping. I could feel the lie on my tongue, but beneath it was a bedrock of defiance. Right, he said, his tone laced with skepticism. Well, don't forget you have that fundraising committee meeting for Josh's school tomorrow. I put it on your calendar. Our conversations were now purely transactional. We were 2 CEOs managing a domestic enterprise, and our love had been replaced by logistics. But on Tuesdays, my world bloomed into color. The attic was my sanctuary. I was painting with a ferocity that surprised me. I bought a larger canvas and began working on something real, something that demanded to be expressed. Leo and I fell into an easy rhythm. We would often be the last to leave, sharing another glass of wine and talking. I learned about his failed marriage to another artist, his choice to run the shop for a steady income to fund his real passion, and his quiet belief that art could save a person's soul. He never pried, but he created a space where I could be honest. Mark's not a bad man, I told him one night, the wine making me bold. He's just empty. He built this perfect life, but he forgot to leave any room for a soul. Leo just nodded, his eyes full of a deep, sad understanding. Some people are afraid of the mess, he said. They don't realize the mess is where all the good stuff is. The joy I found in that attic began to make my life at home unbearable. I started hiding a small sketch pad in my car, drawing the faces of people in coffee shops. I was seeing the world again, not just navigating through it. And the more I saw, the more I realized I couldn't live in that beautiful, sterile, loveless house anymore. I couldn't go back to being a ghost. The decision. One Tuesday, a storm rolled in, lashing rain against the attic skylights. The others left early, but Leo and I stayed, the sound of the storm a wild soundtrack to our quiet companionship. I was struggling with my painting, a swirl of dark, confining shapes and a single brilliant point of light trying to break through. You're fighting it, Leo said, coming to stand behind me. Stop trying to control it, just let it happen. He reached past me, his hand hovering over mine, not quite touching, to point at a section of the canvas. What does this part feel like? He asked, his voice a low murmur by my ear. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I could smell the faint scent of turpentine in him. In that moment, the air grew thick, charged with a decade of unspoken longing. It wasn't just about art anymore. He saw the cage thing inside me because he had one too. He saw me. I turned my head to look at him. His face was inches from mine. The world narrowed to the space between us, to his green eyes and the storm outside, and the wild, terrifying hope blooming in my chest. He leaned in, and I closed my eyes. But he didn't kiss me. He gently took the brush from my hand. Let it be messy, Claire, he whispered, and stepped away. The moment was broken, but the truth of it remained, hanging between us, more powerful than any kiss. I went home and knew what I had to do. The next evening, I waited for Mark in the living room. The jazz playlist was off. The lights were at a neutral, clinical brightness. He walked in, loosening his tie as always. "What's for dinner?" he asked, not looking at me. "Mark, we need to talk," I said. My voice was steady. All the fear had been burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. He finally looked at me, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What is it?" "I want a divorce." The words, so monumental, sounded simple in the quiet room. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Then he laughed. It was the same dismissive, condescending laugh from Thanksgiving. "A divorce? Are you serious?" he scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Claire. Is this about your little painting club? You're going to throw all of this away," he gestured around the perfect room. "For a hobby?" "It was never about the hobby," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It was about the fact that you thought it was just a hobby. You've never seen me, Mark. Not for who I am. You just see the woman who runs your house." His face hardened, the disbelief turning to anger. "I gave you everything. This house, the cars, a perfect life." "You gave me a beautiful cage," I replied. "But I've forgotten how to fly. And I'd rather be free and have nothing than live in here for one more day." I left him standing there, his face a mixture of rage and confusion. I went upstairs and packed a single bag. Clothes, my toiletries, and the dusty portfolio from the back of the closet. I looked at the family photos on the wall, my heart aching for the children I loved, but knowing I couldn't be the mother they deserved until I became myself again. As I walked out the front door, leaving the key on the hall table, I felt a profound, terrifying, and utterly glorious sense of release. The attic. I drove to the art shop in the pouring rain, my one bag on the passenger seat. I didn't know what I was going to do or what I expected from Leo. I just knew I couldn't go anywhere else. He was locking up the front door when I pulled up. He saw my face through the rain-streaked windshield, saw the suitcase, and his expression softened with immediate understanding. He didn't ask questions. He just unlocked the door and let me in. "The attic has a spare mattress," he said simply, "and a hot plate. It's not magnolia, but it's dry." And so, my new life began. Moving into the attic was like moving onto a different planet. My perfectly organized life was replaced by a beautiful chaos. I slept on a mattress on the floor, my clothes in a cardboard box. I washed my face in the utility sink and learned to make coffee on a hot plate. But every morning, the gray Seattle light would filter through the large paint-splattered skylights, and I would wake up feeling not poor, but rich. Leo gave me space, but he was always there. We fell into a new rhythm, one of quiet companionship. We painted for hours in comfortable silence, the only sound the scrape of our brushes and the music from his speaker. In the evenings, we cooked simple meals together, pasta with jarred sauce, grilled cheese sandwiches, and share a bottle of cheap wine. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked until the city outside grew quiet. Our relationship unfolded as naturally as one of his paintings. It wasn't a grand passion, but a slow, gentle layering of trust, understanding, and affection. The first time he kissed me, weeks after I had moved in, felt not like a beginning, but a continuation of a conversation we had been having our whole lives. It was quiet and real, and it felt like coming home. The color of me. In the attic, surrounded by the glorious mess of creation, I started my first real painting. It was a self-portrait. Not of my face, but of my soul. I started with the grays and muted beiges of my old life, creating confining geometric shapes that mimicked the walls of my house. Then, from the center, I let the color explode. The furious red of my anger, the deep blue of my sadness, and a brilliant, defiant slash of cadmium yellow, the color of hope, of sunshine, of a new day. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Some days I would paint with a feverish energy, the emotions pouring out of me and onto the canvas. Other days I would just stare at it, paralyzed by doubt. Through it all, Leo was my quiet anchor. He never told me what to do, but he would place a hot mug of tea by my easel and say, "Trust the mess, Claire. Just trust it." The day I finished, I stepped back, my body aching, my hands stained with a rainbow of colors. It was raw, imperfect, and completely, utterly mine. Leo came and stood beside me. We looked at it for a long time. He didn't say it's beautiful or it's good. He put his arm around my shoulders and said, his voice thick with emotion, "There you are. I see you." Tears streamed down my face. I hung the painting on the main wall of the attic, a bold declaration in the center of our shared, chaotic space. I don't know what the future holds. My divorce is messy and ongoing. My relationship with my children is strained, managed through scheduled video calls where I try to explain a decision they don't yet understand. I have no money and no clear path forward. But this morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and turpentine. I saw my painting, a riot of color against the wall. I saw Leo sketching by the window, the morning light catching the gray in his hair. I don't have a perfect house or a secure future. But for the first time in my life, I have myself. The future is a terrifying, beautiful, blank canvas, and I am finally holding the brush.